Hi, this is the module Scripted Connectors within DataMiner sysadmin. And in this module, we'll take a closer look at how to create a scripted connector from scratch. Now, what is a scripted connector? Well, it's a little bit like a standard connector. So it will fetch information from the outside world, pull it into the DataMiner system and put it in elements and parameters so that we can start working with it in DataMiner. But it's based on scripts, like Python scripts or PowerShell. So it's a very easy and convenient way to script something, get some information and pull it into the DataMiner system without having a lot of connector knowledge. We can already get started here with pulling in some data through scripted connectors. So let's take a look at that. So first thing we will do is take a look at those standard connectors, what they are, and then we'll take a look with what the difference is with those scripted connectors. Once we discovered the details of that, we'll effectively create one in the DataMiner UI, and we do that through the data sources UI. So that's what we will be doing in this short module. First things first, what is a standard connector actually all about? So let's take a look at that. In the connectors module, we already took a look at how to manage our connectors and how to go to the catalog. So we have thousands of connectors there available. So we can easily take a connector, deploy it onto my DataMiner system. So for all kinds of systems and equipment and services, I do have those drivers already available and I can easily add them on my DataMiner system. And if I take a look at such a driver, I will see that it's based on XML. So I can actually read this. There is also a full DataMiner Integration Studio available, like a plugin for Visual Studio to create those drivers or connectors or protocols. That's all the same name. Now, since this is quite an elaborate environment, it might be a little bit too difficult to get started with. So the scripted connectors will take that complexity away. So bear with me. What do we see in that XML? We do see in there, first of all, a number of parameters and some names and some, there will also be, if it's a number or a string, if it's an LED bar, if it's like where it is on the page, which page it's on. So the whole graphical layer is defined in that XML file. So that's already important to note. Next to that, we do also have all the communication that is being defined in a connector. So there are two things in a connector, in a standard connector, that is the graphical layer and also the kind of business logic, which basically tells the DataMiner system that's how you need to fetch that data from this data source. So if it's a Microsoft platform, in this case, it will do WMI queries. If it's like a Cisco switch, it will maybe do some SNMP gets and sets on there. And maybe some other equipment will go through a web API and maybe others with SSH, proprietary protocol, any kind of remote way of getting the information from that source. You can put it in a standard connector. And we can basically pull that in and put it on the UI. So that's a standard connector, and we have been working with that before, and we have been adding some elements there, so we know how that works. Now, what is a scripted connector and what is so different about that scripted connector? Well, a scripted connector will make a distinction between that graphical layer and the business logic. Basically, the business logic, the way you get the data from your data source is going to be defined in a script that you can easily manage here in the UI. So by the way, we are in DataMiner Cube. Underneath apps, you have that data sources section, and in there you can see your data sources or scripts you have in there. And I have an Amsterdam script in Python and I have a CoinCap in PowerShell. So you can see there are two different languages here, and those scripts are basically retrieving information from the outside world. So that's kind of like business logic, retrieving the information. And the information that is being retrieved will be pushed into the DataMiner system And therefore, we will still leverage the protocol XMLs to define that graphical UI and say which parameters we want, where they are, which pages we want. That's still defined in that XML, but we basically auto-generate that through the Data API. So there is a connection between the scripts and your protocols and your data that you push in there, and that's the Data API. Let me maybe tell you a little bit more about that Data API, because that's an important thing. If you go from your scripts to push that into the DataMiner system, you need that Data API. For that, I'll go to the docs website. So docs.dataminer.services, and on there I will search for Data API. And there is a page there on the Data API, which is underneath the data sources. And you can see it comes together with scripted connectors, which I will add in a minute. There's also a tutorial on how to do that. We'll do something like that. Be aware, the Data API, as mentioned here, this feature is currently in preview. For the time of this at the time of this recording, it is in preview. Maybe it's not in preview anymore by the time you look at this video. But if it is in preview, make sure that you might need to take a look at this next page underneath it, getting started with data sources module, because here you will see the prerequisites, which version you need, which DXMs you need to install, how to do that. So all of the extra prerequisites are nicely described in there. Now, assuming that everything is up and running, and the easiest way is using a DaaS, a DataMiner as a service. If you spin up a DaaS today, it is all going to have these goodies in there. The Data API will be already activated also today. Now, if we take a look at the Data API, it will we can push some data to the Data API, and we can immediately see already here in the example what we can push. And this is just a piece of JSON that we can put there and push to the DataMiner system, where you each time define the name of the parameter and the value. So it is like a key value pair. So you have the name of the parameter, CPU utilization, and the value 78. Or here another parameter is the name of the server with that name string next to it. So you can have like a bunch of these parameters, and you just gather these somewhere. So maybe your script is running on a server, you have CPU utilization, and you take that CPU utilization, you put it in that JSON, and you push it to the DataMiner system, to that Data API. That's basically how it works. What will DataMiner do? DataMiner will say like, oh, we need a CPU utilization. So it will create automatically an element, automatically a protocol, and automatically have that in there and populate it with that 78% CPU utilization. Okay. Now, if I have another server reporting also CPU utilization, yeah, how does it know if it's server 1 or server 2? Well, therefore, we use the HTTP headers, and there is two HTTP headers you can identify. The first one is the identifier, which is basically the element name, you could say. So there you will say like, I push the CPU utilization here, and as identifier, I say server 1, and the other server doing the same thing and fetching CPU utilization, pushing it, will say server 2. And two things are coming in on the Data API. One will have the identifier server 1, one will have the identifier server 2. So two elements will be created then, one with the CPU utilization of one and the other. Those two elements will have by default the name specified in the identifier, but you can change it afterwards. DataMiner will internally keep track of what the original identifier was. The second thing that is possible to identify in the HTTP headers is the type. Basically, that's the protocol, because there will be automatically generated a protocol with two parameters in there. So yeah, if server 1 is throwing that to the DataMiner system and server 2 is throwing that as well, you don't necessarily want to have two different drivers or connectors. So you want to make sure that they use the same connector, because those are two servers and they basically push the same information. But for DataMiner to be sure that this is the same information, it's the same thing, it's also both a Microsoft server, for instance, you can define the type there and this will, if it has both the same type, they will both use the same connector there, and it will auto-generate a connector based on that type field there. There's also support for tables and things like that, so more advanced information you can push to that data API, of course. Note here, I'm more assuming that the script is running on the server itself, which is also possible. So it's possible that your script is just hosted on the server 1, and there's a script also on server 2. They are locally fetching the data that they want, and they push it into that JSON to that data API, and the elements are being created. So that's one way of working. Your scripts are hosted somewhere on the equipment itself or on the containers itself. Or you could also have maybe your own node somewhere where you have some scheduled tasks that are executing certain scripts and gathering information and pushing it to the data API. We will be using that possibility to also host it onto the DataMiner system through the data sources UI. So the data sources UI basically allows you to host scripts yourself into the DataMiner system. Like we have 2 scripts here, and those scripts will be executed on a regular basis, and they will be executed doing their thing, gathering information and pushing it to the data API. So there are 2 ways of running an automation script, either on the DataMiner system itself, here in data sources, or you do it yourself somewhere on the system itself that you are monitoring. So once the data is gathered and it pushes that, automatically the protocol will be generated, and you will have a protocol which is read-only automatically generated, and the result is exactly the same as we have with a standard connector. So we will have our element there with a specific name, we have some parameters there, the new values are coming in all the time, automatically they are being trended, all the parameters. You can add some alarm template on there if you want. By default, there is no alarm template, but you can define your alarm template just like with any other ordinary element. There's nothing special about it anymore. It's just also using a connector, but there happens to be a scripted connector that the script does the polling of that retrieval of that data to push it to the DataMiner system. Let's take a quick look at an example in our IT platform. Here, if I go to the apps section and if I go to data sources, I will already have a number of data sources available there. We'll immediately create a brand new one on our DAS system and start from scratch, basically. So here we have an existing platform with already some scripted connectors there. Some of them might be using PowerShell, for instance, the Azure data, for instance. So if I open up that one, so you can see a data source just has a name and a type. Currently, if you want to host it on DataMiner, we only have 2 types we currently have here in this version, Python and PowerShell. So this one is a PowerShell. And it will basically create to the API of Azure to fetch all the VMs that you have running and the reservations to keep track of how many VMs you have per region or per size, and if you have enough reservations and things like that, to keep track of that. To be able to connect to the Azure API, you would need like a username and a password, but in this case they are using a certificate, so you don't need to specify username password here. The certificate is installed on the machine, so the machine can authenticate and go to that API, and it will basically get all the servers there and do some PowerShell magic here to fetch those lists, to organize them according to different tables. I'll show you the result in just a minute. And at the end, what basically happens is that this is being pushed to the data API parameters section, and we'll create an example on that as well. It's localhost because this one is just hosted on the DataMiner system itself. If you would run it yourself, you would need to remote connect to one of the DataMiner agents or throw it to dataminer.services. Okay, the result, to have a quick look at that Azure data. So it will have a list with all the VMs it retrieves and then organize it a little bit per operating system or per size and see how many reservations you have and the amount of servers you have running at any point in time. But there's another one as well that I want to show. If I go back, there's another one in Python. So the first one I showed was in PowerShell. This one is in Python. And this one will actually do lux monitoring. So it will fetch the information from a lux meter we have here somewhere in the building. If I take a look at that one, I want to show that one because it has some nice trending. So the current lux outside is 200, not that much, so it's getting a little bit darker, and I can see that indeed the lux has going up and then it went down. It was a kind of a gray day today. If I would take a look month to date, I would see that typically instead of today it only went very low there. It would typically goes into the tens of thousands of lux, but not today. Okay, so that's just trending that. Monitoring, you can also add, as with any other element, you can just go and create your alarm templates onto this element. So you can see this is just regular elements, but they are being fetched in a little bit a different way through that API or that scripted connector. Okay, so that's a little bit how it works and what the internals are. Let's now see how we can add a scripted connector using that data sources UI. So remember, there are two ways of running a scripted connector. Either you run it yourself somewhere and then you do it yourself, if it's on the machine itself or the system itself or some intermediate thing you host yourself, go ahead. If you go and you say like, oh, DataMiner can host it, then we can use that data sources UI. And if we go there, we can add and create a brand new one, give it a name, specify. Currently it's only Python and PowerShell in this version. We specify if it's a Python execute that it needs to do or a PowerShell execute. And we just put the script in there as we wish. Now, I'm not going to bother you with really typing out a full script, so I will be using an example script that we can get from here. There's an AKA link in there, but basically it just goes to our GitHub. If we go to our GitHub repository or our GitHub organization, Skyline Communications, you will find there a repository SLC example scripted connector. So if you would just search for scripted connectors, you will immediately find this public repo. So this is a public repo with a couple of examples in there, and I will take one of those examples. So the Azure data is in there as well, an older version apparently, but I will go for the Amsterdam Internet Exchange. And if I take a look at that one, so this is a scripted connector that scrapes data from a website. And if I take a look at this website and open it up in a new tab page, I will see that this web page actually has here on the upper right hand side the current bit rates of Amsterdam, and I can change the location to something else like Mumbai, for instance. And if I go to Mumbai location, I will see that there the traffic is 80, and on Amsterdam, what was it on Amsterdam, like 80 gigs, and here 10 tera, so it's a different unit as well. So you can actually see this is the current real-time bitrate being indicated there. So this scripted connector will fetch that web page using Python and take that value there and then push it into the DataMiner system. And it will do that for different locations: Amsterdam, Chicago, Hong Kong, Mumbai, etc. So let's take a look. That was the README. Let's go to the Python script itself. So here we can see the Python script. So indeed, the URL is here of the website, and it will use some imports here. and you can go through there, and then it will go for the different regions or the different locations. It will each time fetch that web page and search for a certain identifier there to get that specific real-time value of that bitrate, and then it will basically compose that and throw that to the DataMiner system into the data API there. Remember that there is those HTTP headers, so it will create an element with the name amxix.net. If I want, I can change it, and it will use a protocol or create a protocol with the name AMS traffic. So what I will do is I will, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do Control A, not Control S, and do a copy. So I copy this Python scripts, and now I want to go and put that into the DataMiner system. So the headers are also identified here, the identifier and the type. So that's maybe I can play with that and change that a little bit. I won't do it on my IT system that I showed before, because that has already many things on there. So I want to more easily see what I'm doing. So I'm going to use my DAS system that I created during the fundamentals part. So it's a rather blank system, just click, 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 and I had a DataMiner system running in the cloud, which already has the data API and the data sources fully operational, running on the latest version and things like that. So nothing but goodies. Before I deployed just some anomaly package, and I created an element, but otherwise there is nothing on there. So if I would go and take a look at the protocols, you will see only the anomaly are on there, the Cisco that I deployed, and the Microsoft platform. And I will now go to the data sources page to create my first brand new data source onto this rather blank system, because there's nothing much on there yet. So let's create our data source. So I need to specify a name. So this is just an arbitrary name, training my first name, and I choose between the Python or the PowerShell. So I'll go for Python, and I paste my script in there, because typically I won't start to develop in here, but I typically do that in a more useful editor. So yeah, everything is in there, but I said that maybe I wanted to play around with those headers. So the headers are here. So the identifier is the name of the element that it will create. Let me just call that a little bit different. AMS website scraper. So that's my element that I will create, and I can still change that afterwards, of course. And there will be a connector created AMS traffic. As I just showed you, there is no such connector on there yet. And it will do that for these regions. In there, I could add or remove more regions as I wish on that website. I can check what is there. And then it will push that into the DataMiner system. So now what will happen if I click on the create? It will add it to the DataMiner system, and then it will every minute execute that. So whenever I create that, you will see it's created. It will immediately start to execute this Python script, and then on a minute basis, it will effectively, you can see there it pops up. So it immediately executes for the first time, and then every minute it will update. So you can see a new element is immediately automatically popping up. All the values are already there. The parameters are created. So let's take a quick look at the protocols. Yeah, there it is. AMS traffic has been automatically generated. You can see it with the icon. If you take a look at the tooltip, generated by Data API in DataMiner. And if I open it up, you will see this is a read-only protocol, and it has in there indeed the Amsterdam location and the Bay Area and Caribbean and things like that. So all the parameters, let's take a look at it here, as are indicated here, are on there. And you will effectively see that every minute there will be a new value popping in. So now this is 989. So within the minute, this will update and change to new values. And you can see all of these are trended by default. I can now apply an alarm template on there as well if I would wish to do so. So I can drill down and take a look. Of course, I won't have a lot of trending yet because it is all brand new and still needs to start populating the data. So that's how easy it is to start getting in some new values from a data source. You go to the data sources, you create a brand new one, you just fill in the script there and you save it. Note, this is going to be executed every minute, so there's a fixed schedule every minute. You can, of course, in your Python script do more things to have faster executions or skip certain executions. You can play with that in your Python script as well, of course. Or if you want, you can, of course, host it yourself as well. And if you host it yourself, you can have more flexibility on what your timing would be on executing that. Then you have full control over that. As I said, this is still at the preview stage, the data sources and the data API. So more features will be added in the short future. So maybe when you're watching, you will already have some more information in our docs. But the objective was in this module to get you started by adding a brand new scripted connector there. So that's what I wanted to tell you in this module. Scripted connectors, definitely take a look at it. It's a very convenient, easy way of just typing in a small script, getting it into the DataMiner system, and immediately leveraging all the DataMiner functionality without the need to have a full-blown driver. I hope you enjoyed this session and see you in the next one.